And welcome back to the Dino Bidala Show. Right now, very happy to welcome back on the show John Bonifaz. He's a constitutional lawyer and the co-founder and president of Free Speech for People. John, nice to see you again. We've talked last time you were on, I think, is about the 14th Amendment, Section 3, which should have solved a lot of problems, but the Supreme Court didn't let us do that. But good to have you on now to talk about a lot of things going on.
Thanks so much. Good to be with you, Dean.
So let's start out with an illegal issue that would deal with ballots. And you would think, given the Supreme Court decision in the 14th Amendment case, where they didn't want any patchwork and chaos and all that, this should be a no-brainer. But we do have the Heritage Foundation, who created the Project 2025, and some other Republicans saying Harris can't be on the ballot now because apparently Republicans get to choose the person they're going to run against. That's the new thing now in America. But they're going to try to prevent legally having Harris on the ballot. So what can you say from a legal point of view in response to this?
Well, Dean, I'm a nonpartisan, small d Democratic lawyer fighting for our democracy. I can tell you they have no case. This is a ludicrous legal argument they're trying to make. There is no basis to claim that a party, prior to even holding its convention, prior to even holding a vote for its nominee, must put forward someone whom somehow the other party wants to run against. That just doesn't make any sense. Joe Biden had every right to withdraw his name from being considered to be the nominee, and he did that. And there's no basis whatsoever to demand that somehow he be on the ballot simply because they want him to be on the ballot.
Very true. And just going back to the 14th Amendment case from Colorado, I was looking at it today, and the Supreme Court said the idea of a patchwork where dramatically change the behavior of voters, parties across the nation, and this would cause chaos. So if they're hoping, and I think the Heritage Foundation and some on the right are hoping somehow it percolates back up the Supreme Court, they would be hard-pressed, the Supreme Court, to essentially give two different decisions, one allowing Trump on the ballot, and then another not allowing Harris with no legal basis whatsoever. I mean, as you're saying.
Yeah, well, to be clear, of course, we litigated along with the crew and others the focus around challenging Donald Trump's eligibility to be on the ballot because he had, after taking an oath of office, engaged in insurrection. We do think he was and is disqualified under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. So we think the Supreme Court got that wrong. But yes, I don't think the Supreme Court can arguably give any basis to this argument now that somehow because a party prior to its convention, prior to even a nomination vote, must put forward a candidate that the other party wants to have on the ballot. It's just there's no legal argument there.
Now every party would be able to pick the opposition they want to run against, which would be remarkable. You know, so let's talk about Supreme Court, but articles of impeachment against Justice Alito and Thomas introduced by AOC. My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that you were involved in either conferring or even drafting these resolutions. What can you tell us?
Absolutely. Free Speech for People is proud to have assisted the Congresswoman's office in drafting these articles with her staff. We do think it's a critical step forward for accountability for this unprecedented corruption at the Supreme Court. Both of these justices named in these articles, Justice Thomas and Justice Alito, have committed abuses of power that require them to now be removed from their seats on the Supreme Court. You know, with Justice Thomas, clearly the question here goes back to all of the data that's come forward demonstrating that he has taken hundreds of thousands of dollars in lavish gifts from benefactors with interest before the court. He's refused to recuse himself from those cases where those benefactors have interest before the court. And then, of course, on top of that, his wife, Ginny Thomas, was directly involved in the Stop the Steal movement to try to overturn the 2020 presidential election. And he refused to recuse himself from all cases dealing with challenges to the 2020 election and the January 6th insurrection. With Justice Alito, he also has taken lavish gifts from benefactors with interest before the court. He also has refused to recuse himself from those cases. But then on top of that, of course, he flew outside his homes. He was aware, at least, of flags being flown outside his home in Virginia and in his beach home that were insurrectionist flags that were designed clearly to show support for the insurrection. And there's no question here that he had to recuse himself from cases dealing with the January 6th insurrection and from the presidential 2020 election, and yet he refused to do so. So both of these justices have engaged in incredibly corrupt ways, bringing disrepute onto the court, and they must be removed.
I think everyone listening agrees with you on my show. Everyone in my audience agrees with you. So as a practical matter now, will there even be any kind of hearing? Or because Democrats are in the minority, we have to wait till Democrats were to gain control of the House to do such a thing?
I don't think, unfortunately, that those in control of the House will allow a hearing right now on this critical question. But I do think what the Congresswoman has done is appropriately set the table for this discussion. We needed to have her leadership in introducing these articles of impeachment, and we celebrate her leadership in doing that. But we need to also move forward. There are a number of co-sponsors who've come forward to support these articles, and that's wonderful too. And we need to add more co-sponsors. And then as this debate continues, there needs to be ultimately a hearing before the House Judiciary Committee, an airing of this evidence, and real action associated with holding these justices accountable.
Yeah, we've had Congressman Hank Johnson on many, many times, who's been such an advocate for ethics reform and working with Senator Sheldon Whitehouse on this very issue. When you look at what Alito did was troubling. I didn't see a long pattern. You may have seen more. What Thomas did is so beyond the pale of what can be acceptable. And I cannot believe for the life of me, nor can anyone, frankly, that there are no ethics rules before this. And how did Chief Justice Roberts, who is so concerned, he tells us about the integrity and reputation of the court, could ever allow this to happen?
Well, exactly right. That question, Dean, is the Chief Justice has a responsibility to protect the integrity of the Supreme Court, and he has failed remarkably on that. I mean, they issued a so-called code of ethics after a lot of pressure, and that code of ethics is entirely voluntary. There's no enforcement associated with it. It has no teeth, and they've left it up to each individual justice to decide whether they recuse themselves from cases where they have a clear conflict of interest. So what we saw, both with the Trump v. Anderson case, which was a Section 3 14th Amendment case, and with the Trump immunity case, the most recent one they issued, neither Justice Thomas nor Alito recused themselves from those cases. And that made absolutely no sense. It was an outrage from the standpoint of integrity for the Supreme Court. And unfortunately, Justice Roberts is already tainted with this because he has refused to step in and ensure that these justices be removed and have a strong code of ethics for the Supreme Court.
When you just take a step back, it almost seems like something we would read about in history and go like, wow, that was a corrupt court. I can't believe they let that happen. It's happening right now in 2024, right in front of us.
Right in front of us. It's no question about it. And that's why we had this campaign we launched in April, SCOTUSReformNow.org, designed to take on this corruption at the Supreme Court with multiple demands, including that the Senate Judiciary Committee do its job to investigate full scale this corruption at the Supreme Court, to issue the subpoena to Harlan Crow that they have yet to issue, the billionaire benefactor Justice Thomas, to enforce the subpoena against Leonard Leo of the Federal Society that they issued to him, but he's refused to comply. And Steve Bannon's in a federal prison right now for refusing to comply with a congressional subpoena. So you would hope that there would be some enforcement there of the subpoena on Leonard Leo. But then also we need to see Justices Thomas, Ginny Thomas, Justice Alito, Martha Ann Alito, his wife, and Justice Roberts all brought before the Senate Judiciary Committee, put under oath, and to testify about this corruption at the Supreme Court. So that's point one. Point two are the impeachment articles that Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez has introduced. We also, frankly, have called for impeachment of Justice Kavanaugh because of the disrepute he brought onto the Supreme Court with his lies and his perjury that he committed during the confirmation hearings for his seat. And then we have the call for expanding the court and enacting term limits, which is critical, adding 4 new seats to the court and setting term limits for these justices, and finally having a strict code of conduct passed by Congress, enforceable on the Supreme Court with respect to actions going forward. All this is needed, and that's why we the people have to step in and demand it in terms of preserving our court and our Constitution.
I had Senator Dick Durbin on my show last year, probably in the summer. He's chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And I asked him, would he subpoena Justice Thomas and some other people, but specifically Thomas? And his answer was everything's on the table. Now, apparently it's a big table. He can't reach all the way across it because it's a year later and he hasn't used it. Do you get any sense why the hesitance to use all the powers available? I know he raised historically the problem with subpoenaing a justice, but not with Harlan Crow. There's no issue.
No.
Not with Ginny Thomas. There's no issue. So why not do it there?
Well, not only that, with Harlan Crow, the committee's already approved the subpoena, but he won't issue it. And I think the reason, frankly, is, and I don't think it's a good one, that he thinks somehow that doing this would prevent them from confirming judges to the federal bench after this. Well, there's plenty of Republicans already who have been vocal that they're not going to confirm any more judges in this current election season. So I don't think there's a basis for that. And frankly, if Senator Durbin doesn't want to do his job as chair of the Judiciary Committee and investigate this corruption, then he ought to step aside and let Senator Sheldon Whitehouse become the chair, who is ready to do his job and enforce these subpoenas and investigate this corruption at the Supreme Court. But we cannot have a Senate Judiciary Committee that is missing in action at this critical moment in our history when they have oversight responsibilities for the Supreme Court. They must act.
Yes. And so, John, you mentioned Supreme Court reform, 4 more justices added. And how did you get to that number, just so I understand?
Well, this isn't only us. This is in the bill, Judiciary Act, which is pending in Congress. And the way that the 4 new justices has been determined is that there are now 13 different circuits. You know, there used to be far less appellate circuits in the country. We used to actually only have 6 justices, then it went to 9. There's nothing in the Constitution that says it needs to stay at 9 or even have any magic number. But the idea of going to 4 more is to deal with the fact that there's been an expansion of the judiciary and an expansion of the number of circuits that the court has to oversee. And that is a clear basis for saying there needs to be more justices on the court. Now, in addition to that, I think it's timely to have this to restore balance and integrity to the court. We have certain justices there who are under a cloud of corruption, Thomas, Alito, and Kavanaugh, and having 4 new justices would restore faith that the American people have in this court and would demonstrate that it has more balance. There's a real danger when it comes to the Supreme Court that the public no longer has faith in their impartial judicial decision-making. The only way they operate and have a force in this country, they don't have an army on their side. They don't have anything that enforces their decisions. The way they are able to operate is because of the public faith in their decision-making. But when the public doesn't think they're being impartial, when the public thinks they're corrupt, then we have a huge problem with respect to the rule of law and with respect to their decisions. And that's why expanding the court is a critical measure for helping to restore that integrity.
I saw a Quinnipiac poll, about 2/3 of Americans believe the court makes decisions based on politics, which is the worst thing possible now. It's undermined the checks and balances of the Constitution. That was not what was the intention of it, because now it's just a political, and sadly it's controlled by a party that I don't like. I know you're nonpartisan. I'm very partisan. So we kind of balance out in the middle there, but it's kind of remarkable to see what's going on. And so anything else? So Supreme Court reform, what about, we heard rumors that President Biden was going to propose some kind of actual reform. And that was going to include term limits. Now, I'm not sure what Vice President Harris, as the nominee, expected nominee, will do. She's been very critical of this Supreme Court. She's been open to the idea in 2020 of Supreme Court reform, but I think things have changed so dramatically from 2020 to now. Overturning Dobbs' decision and just egregious decision, one after the other, by this highly partisan court, and the corruption element. Are you hopeful that we will see, and I know you're nonpartisan, but if only one party's calling for it, that's the party we talk about. Are you hopeful you see Vice President Harris, if she's the nominee, call for some kind of reform? And do you like the idea of term limits as part of a package?
Well, we have endorsed term limits as part of the package. We do think it's critical that it be part of the package, not the only reforms put forward, but we have endorsed that. And look, I think that President Biden should go forward with his plan to call out the need for Supreme Court reform. I think that would elevate it, but we want to know what the details are of that plan. And we certainly will push for having expanding the court be part of that overall reform plan, as well as a strict code of conduct with respect to ethics reform. I do think as we go forward, Dean, the public more and more is going to demonstrate they're behind this. They're behind these kinds of reforms. It makes no sense that lower court judges at the federal appellate level, district court level, that they have to abide
Yep.
by a code of ethics, but the Supreme Court justices do not. And as Congressman Jamie Raskin and Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez have said in their $50 gift ban, bill, which is also a major reform that needs to happen, which is basically they can't take, as members of Congress, more than $50. They're barred whatsoever from having any kind of gifts come to them. And yet these guys on the Supreme Court, they can take thousands, if not millions of dollars from benefactors with interest before the court. And there's no ban on that. They're free to be. Get your, luxury vehicle to go around the country, or get your loans for your nephew for their, private school tuition, whatever else it is that you want. It's open season to take that money and to take those gifts. Makes absolutely no sense and completely undermines the integrity of the institution.
I don't want anyone to take gifts, but John Oliver did offer Justice Thomas his luxury RV and money if he would leave the court. And that one I can get behind, because he's leaving the court. Like, Thomas would have to leave the court.
Right.
And then that's fine. And replaced with someone who's not corrupt like that. So I'm chatting with John Bonifaz, the constitutional lawyer and co-founder and president of Free Speech for People. Touching on big money, Donald Trump just over this weekend said, I love Elon Musk. He endorsed me, and I read he gives me $45 million a month. And that's the reporting from the Wall Street Journal. Elon Musk was going to donate $45 million to a super PAC supporting Trump. And what did then Trump say? We have to make life good for Musk. He also had a meeting, Washington Post reported, in April at Mar-a-Lago, telling fossil fuel executives, give me $1 billion. I'll roll back everything President Biden's done on climate change. It's going to be a great deal, and quotes deal. You'll make even more money. And the worst part is this is all legal. This is legal. This is where we are. When you look at the corruption caused by legal bribery of Citizens United and other cases like that, what do we do?
Well, this is incredible. Unprecedented level of corruption we're seeing now with respect to big money in politics. And it is sadly ingrained in our current campaign finance system. I do think one of the biggest things we have to do is continue to call for a constitutional amendment that overturns the Citizens United and Buckley v. Valeo rulings, that ends this fiction of corporations being treated as people with constitutional rights, and that ends the fiction of money equaling speech in the political process. If you have billions of dollars, you're drowning out the speech of everyone else, and ordinary citizen voters have the right to speak in the same way that the billionaire does, and yet their voices get drowned out. But in addition to the constitutional amendment fight, and on our site, we have the free and fair elections that Congressman Jim McGovern has introduced that we're proposing. But in addition to that, is the fight around abolishing super PACs. This has become the newest vehicle for pouring billions of dollars into our political process and corrupting our elections. And it really did not come out of Citizens United. It came out of a DC Circuit Court of Appeals ruling known as Speech Now v. FEC. Mm-hmm. And we have been for years now urging that there be a revisitation of that ruling and a test vehicle for it to get to the Supreme Court, because we don't think that the argument behind that ruling, that unlimited donations to a PAC cannot be corrupting, we don't think that holds any water. And when you look at the Elon Musk example, that's a clear example. Donald Trump gets up there and says, he's giving it to me. He regards it as a donation to him directly. And so this fiction that exists, that, okay, super PACs engage in independent expenditure, absolutely not. But apart from that is the fact that you have now this unlimited wealth that's coming from these billionaires to flood our airwaves, to flood our elections, and to undermine the basic principle, one person, one vote. It's a huge danger to our democracy, and we have to fight back against it.
And you make a great point, because the only limitation is the candidate can't coordinate with a super PAC, but the candidate can know very well. And I've often said on my show, if all I can give a candidate is a vote, and someone else can give $5 million, and they're going to listen to us equally, that candidate's an idiot. You should listen to the guy who gave you $5 million more than you listen to me. And that's the problem. This is human nature. It's common sense. You're asking us to divorce ourselves from common sense in these discussions about, it's not, of course it's corrupting. It's
Yeah.
bribery. They've legalized bribery. And as
Yeah.
we have more acute income inequality in our nation, you have more billionaires now who can just one after the other. And I don't care that some are Democrats. I wish none of them could give more money, some set amount, everyone in America, the same amount. That's it. You want to run for office and spend your
Absolutely.
own money. That's a different story. But
Absolutely.
besides that, you should not be able to give money like this. This is
Absolutely. And
ridiculous.
that's actually built into the amendment that Congressman McGovern's introduced. We have a mandated public funding system for all elections where members of Congress and everyone else, they get a set amount of money and they run on those funds. Look, we believe in public libraries, public schools, public roads. There is no institution more public and more owned by the people than our democracy. And yet here today, it's owned by the wealthy few. So we need to ensure that for public elections, they be publicly owned by the people. And that means public funding of elections.
Absolutely. And you're also going to bring out a whole nother group of Americans who want to serve our nation because you don't have to be wealthy or well connected with the wealthy
Absolutely.
to run. I mean, there have been different times in my life I've contemplated seeking office. And the most distasteful part is not asking people for money. I could do that. That's not it. It's about raising millions when you could do so much more with that money to help people in a whole
Absolutely.
different way.
Yeah, and this has been tested already, in the states of Maine and Arizona and Connecticut and New York City where they have public funding elections.
Yep.
People run who do not have access to wealth, and people are able to attain public office. And you have a whole different set of candidates, as you say, who engage in the process in those states because of that kind of reform. We cannot have a system that caters to the wealthy few. We cannot have a system, as Congressman Jamie Raskin and I wrote years ago, called the wealth primary, that still exists today. You have to win the wealth primary before you go on and win election. And that is a total anathema to what the idea of one person, one vote is about.
Absolutely. And the last thing is, and on your website for your organization, Free Speech for People, you talk about election protection. So what are you doing now? Just so people understand, what does that mean in the real world?
Well, we are engaged in multiple fights to protect the right to vote and to protect our elections in different courtrooms all over the country. In Arizona and Texas, we're challenging voter suppression laws that were enacted by the state legislatures in those states after the big lie was propagated, claiming massive voter fraud in the 2020 election, which did not happen. There's no evidence of it. They enacted laws designed to suppress the vote, to make it more difficult particularly for disenfranchised communities to participate in the political process. So we're involved in challenges on behalf of civil rights organizations in both those states. We're also involved, frankly, in a case in New Hampshire that's about to go before a federal judge there on a preliminary injunction hearing, dealing with the use of artificial intelligence to disrupt an election 2 days before the New Hampshire presidential primary in January of this year. Thousands of calls were generated, robocalls to New Hampshire voters, targeting Democratic voters, mimicking Joe Biden's voice, an AI fake voice of Joe Biden, urging voters to save their vote, not to vote in the primary, but to save their vote for the general election. And this was a very dangerous move 48 hours before the actual election. So the legal in voters and individual voters are our clients in that case, demanding that there be a nationwide injunction against the entities that put forward these robocalls and make it clear to all others who might try to do copycat actions. This is violative of the Voting Rights Act. This is a form of voter intimidation.
That's unbelievable. And the fears and the concerns going to this election, given the stakes are so high, the contrasting visions of a nation. Plus, Donald Trump understands if he loses, he is likely, not definitely, but likely going to spend time in jail. And so the stakes, AI being abused, is something we have to be worried about. And then also more traditional ways of voter intimidation we can expect. So, John, if people want to find out more about Free Speech for People, donate, get involved, where can they go?
Well, we invite people to join us in our campaign, this work all across the country to defend our democracy. They can go to freespeechforpeople.org to sign up to get updates and to learn more about how you can get involved.
John, thanks so much for your time and your expertise and the great work you're doing at Free Speech for People. And I look forward to chat with you. Hopefully before Election Day, we'll chat again, about a month out, see what's going on in terms of election integrity, protecting it, and what are the concerns for people so they understand it.
Thanks so much, Dean. Great to be with you.
Nice chatting. Have a great day, John.